right. Well, you can probably hear by the recording in progress that let's get rolling here. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Charlie Schneider. I'm the coordinator of the Salmon Steelhead Coalition, and I'll be helping to moderate this press conference today. Before we get started, I just wanted to give everyone a heads up. We are going to be recording this, so just want to make you aware of that, and we will make that available to everyone after the webinar today. So I'm here with representatives from 4 groups that have filed a notice of intent to sue PG&E for violations under the Endangered Species Act. And I wanted to do some quick introductions here. We're joined by Alicia Heyman, Executive Director of Friends of the Eel River, Brian Johnson, the California Director of Trout Unlimited, Glenn Spain, the Northwest Region Director for the Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Associations, and Reggie Collins, Legal and Policy Director of California Trout. So a quick agenda, how things will go. I'm going to give just a couple background slides on the project just to get everyone oriented. And then we'll do a quick Q&A with our panelists here. And then we'll open it up to everyone in the audience for Q&A. If you have questions that you think of while we're going through these couple slides, or as any of the representatives here are speaking, go ahead and put them in the question and the Q&A bar down at the bottom, not the chat. Please use the Q&A so we can capture those. We'll get to as many as we can. We just have a half an hour here, and any questions we don't get to, we'll try to follow up with you if we have your contact info. Otherwise, as part of the media advisory, you have my email, so feel free to email me directly and I can connect you with anyone here if you'd like to speak to them after. So with that, a little bit of quick background on what the Potter Valley Project is, for those of you that aren't aware. So the Potter Valley Project is 2 dams in the upper main stem Eel River, about 15 miles northwest or northeast of Ukiah. The project is 2 dams and a diversion tunnel. Scott Dam, the larger of the 2 dams, forms the Lake Pillsbury Reservoir. And about 12 miles downstream is Cape Horn Dam, where the diversion tunnel diverts water through a mountain into the Russian River watershed, where hydroelectricity is developed in a small powerhouse in Potter Valley. The dams block fish passage. Scott Dam is a total passage barrier for fish, and Cape Horn Dam has a fish ladder, but it doesn't function very well. So the larger dam, Scott Dam, oops, what happened to my screen share? Apologies. Sorry about that, folks. Not sure what happened here. That's okay, I'll just talk you through it. So the dams are problematic for salmon in a couple ways. As I mentioned, Scott Dam is the total passage barrier and blocks over 200 miles of spawning and nursery habitat. Again, Cape Horn Dam has a fish ladder, but it doesn't work well. It fills with sediment under high flows. And as a result, it can get closed for long periods of time during the winter, which is the important migration season for salmon and steelhead. So both dams also impact the natural flow of the Eel River by changing the timing and volume of flows, which can cause harm to fish. And so with that, I wanted to bring our panelists on here and just ask them a few questions to kind of set up some background for why their groups are intending to sue PG&E. So I wanted to start with Brian Johnson from TU. Brian, I was hoping you could tell us a bit about what license expiration for the project means and why that's important.
Yep, I can do that. And Charlie, if you can take a look in chat, we've got a question from Ryan Burns about a copy of the NOI, and I know you have a process for doing that. Yeah. We'll get back to you real quick, Ryan. Yeah, so I'm Brian Johnson. I'm the California Director for Trout Unlimited, and last week was very significant in the long history of this project, which has been a burden for the Eel River for over 100 years. On Thursday, the license to operate the project for PG&E expired, and that sets in motion a number of things. And most directly, it'll lead in the immediate future to requirement for the utility PG&E to prepare a plan and a schedule for surrendering the project license and decommissioning the project. And so that's the short version, and I'll give a little bit more context to what's going on for because it may be helpful. So this is like other hydropower projects, it's regulated by an agency that you'll hear during the course of the day referred to as FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And they operate under the Federal Power Act as the main federal regulator for hydropower dams. And there we go, there's the press kit. And they issue licenses for 30 to 50 years. This project, I believe, has had 2 50-year licenses that just expired. PG&E started as they were required to several years ago to explore whether to relicense the project, and decided that they weren't going to do that. The project is obsolete and loses money, and stated a little over 3 years ago that they weren't going to relicense the project, and that if somebody didn't take it over and pursue the license, that they would file for license surrender and decommissioning. FERC put out a notice to other folks in March, I believe, of 2019, soliciting what they called notices of intent to pursue the license. Some of you covered this extensively at the time and along the way. There was a group that initially pursued that and explored it, including Caltrout and Reggie's here, and ultimately were unable to push that forward, and including basic steps of completing all of the studies and things that would have been required to file a final license application, which would have been due last Thursday. And they told FERC several months ago that that was unlikely, and in fact they didn't do that. And so the process under the FERC regs is that we'll probably see a notice from FERC very shortly directing PG&E to describe a schedule and plan for decommissioning the project. And that will almost certainly lead to removal of the 2 dams. It does not necessarily mean that there won't be a way for Russian River water users to acquire the tunnel or a water right and operate later, but that would have to be outside of a FERC license. And we'll see what we get from them and whether that interest exists. Our groups are focused because we see a very strong sense of urgency in what's happening to fisheries on the North Coast and around the West, to work with PG&E to decommission this thing and get the dams removed, and we'll take it from there. And the license expiration has other implications for endangered species coverage and such, which you'll hear more about from the other panelists there.
Yeah, and I think that's a great segue, to Reggie and my next question, which is, if you could just kind of give the purpose of the legal action and maybe describe what you hope it will accomplish.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Brian's answer feeds directly into this, into your question, Charlie. So, first and foremost, the reason that all of our groups, operate in the Eel River is that we think that there's an incredible opportunity to achieve a portion of what we saw of the salmon and steelhead abundance. Eel has an incredible history for salmonids, and access to the upper habitat is really why we engage not only in the FERC process, but also in this litigation. And so our goal here is to highlight the importance of that upper watershed, and to highlight what has become very clear over the last 2 to 3 years of our really strenuous involvement in the project, with over $2.5 million worth of studies done by the NOI partners. It's really revealed to us that Cape Horn Dam is fundamentally broken, and the project itself is a major hindrance to salmon and steelhead. So what we've done here is we brought a 60-day notice to sue PG&E for take at Cape Horn Dam specifically, and the project as a whole. PG&E was covered under the FERC license for that 50-year period, as Brian mentioned earlier. But now that it's lapsed as of last week, PG&E no longer has take coverage for listed species, meaning that they can no longer harm, harass, directly kill or injure salmon steelhead at their project site. And so what we're doing here is pointing out the obvious, or what is obvious to us, that the current fish passage operation is functionally broken and leads to take. Because that incidental take coverage, meaning PG&E had the ability through their operations, as justified by a NIMS approved opinion, they had the ability to operate as is in status quo for that 50-year period. Now that we've learned everything we have, it's time for PG&E to admit and to realize that this project does in fact take fish. And so along with the license, as Brian explained, NIMS's biological protections also expired with that license, meaning that PG&E is now vulnerable to litigation we were bringing. PG&E has 60 days to remedy the situation. Otherwise, our 4 groups anticipate moving this directly through the legal process. And we believe the result will be that PG&E has to modify both the operations and the physical structures of Cape Horn Dam. Now, one of the questions you asked, Charlie, is why we're doing this. And we're using every lever we have available, including the FERC and the legal process, to explain what we think is relatively clear. There's a solution here that involves removal of the dam's operation, or opening up that 288 linear river miles of habitat above Scott Dam. And it's really a enormous opportunity to be the next large-scale dam removal in the United States. And so we think this is just part of overall strategy, and we look forward to working with PG&E and FERC to realize this really as quickly as possible.
Great, thanks for that. Yeah, I mean, let's talk about that opportunity a little bit. And Glenn, I was hoping you could maybe talk about what dam removal might mean for the fishing community, the commercial fishing community on the North Coast.
Sure. What we need to do is look at what the situation is now compared to the historic productivity of the river. This was the 3rd largest salmon producing river in California originally, second after only the Klamath and the Sacramento-San Joaquin system. According to the historic record and the scientists, we would find as many as 800,000 adults returning in a good year to the river. Today we have about 3,000 Chinook there, and even smaller amounts of some other stocks, but Chinook would be the stock that we would ordinarily be able to harvest. If you look at that, that means that the dams and other forces in the river have pushed the level of productivity of salmon down to 0.5% or less of what we historically had in numbers. That means, of course, our fisheries are closed down and have been closed down for decades. We cannot afford to target any of those stocks, and they're ESA listed, so we can't legally do that. And to avoid them, we have to avoid that whole area of the coastline. And even though there are a lot of fish coming up from the south and the north migrating through, we can't catch them. That's because of what's called weak stock management. Those are the limiting factors in the Eel River because they're ESA listed. We have to make sure that we avoid them at all costs. The end result has been devastating, and many different port systems up and down the coast. We've lost thousands of jobs. We've lost basically millions of dollars in revenue. And that's been the situation. We've sort of adapted to a horrific situation. But this dam removal gives us a chance to undo that damage. And what that would do is it would restore access to something over 200 miles of once historically fully occupied, in still pretty good shape, habitat, spawning and rearing habitat above where the dams are now. Move the river much closer to its original historic productivity, restore hundreds of jobs, if not thousands of jobs up and down the coast, eliminate a lot of these weak stock restrictions that we have on other stocks, and bring lots of dollars back to our coastal communities. And that's basically what we see as the important part of this whole thing. Is for us, it's an economic survival issue. Our coastal communities have been severely battered by salmon losses. Salmon were once the most productive fishery in the West Coast and could be again. This is part of the restoration effort that we need to see.
Great. Thanks for that, Glenn. And yeah, I mean, Alicia, maybe you could talk a little more about why the eel is such a unique opportunity for recovering salmon stocks.
Yeah, well, as I've been saying for a while now, the eel is a river of opportunity. It presents unique conservation opportunities for salmon and steelhead because our native fish are still wild. The eel is perhaps our last and best chance for preserving runs of California coastal Chinook salmon, Northern California steelhead, and other species of interest for the entire state. The eel has no hatcheries, so our fish have their wild genetic diversity, and this diversity is really critical to providing species the resilience they need to survive changes like those presented by the climate crisis. The eel is home to the southernmost run of summer steelhead on the planet. The endangered Northern California summer steelhead have this unique life history, and they serve a really vital role in the ecosystem. They transport ocean-derived nutrients deep into the upper reaches of the river, and they're the fish which arguably stand to benefit the most from access to the cold water habitat in the upper basin. Plus, the genetics for summer steelhead live on in rainbow trout that are trapped behind Scott Dam. And this means that there's potential for the offspring of those trout to essentially become summer steelhead once again if they could just reach the ocean. Recent research from National Marine Fisheries Service confirms previous research and traditional ecological knowledge that the upper basin habitat is some of the best habitat in the entire watershed, particularly for rearing juveniles. It has cold water sources even in warm and dry years, and it provides a refuge from the invasive and predatory pike minnow, which wreak havoc on salmonid populations. Researchers from NIMS have confirmed, as folks have said earlier, that there's about 280 miles of habitat appropriate for steelhead locked up behind Scott Dam. Once the dams are removed, the eel, which already has more wild and scenic miles designated than any other river in California, will also become the longest free-flowing river in the state. To be very clear, the habitat in the eel headwaters, which scientists have described as like adding a whole nother Van Dusen River to the watershed, it offers unique benefits to salmonids compared to habitat in the rest of the watershed. It has consistent sources of cold water and ideal conditions for rearing juveniles, and this is why it's so important that we restore access to this perfect salmon and steelhead nursery. And I saw a question in the chat about the water supply in the Russian River, and so I'd be happy to jump into answering that.
Yeah.
The reality is that there's still an opportunity for an ecologically appropriate diversion. And by that, I mean one that operates without a dam and runs during the wet season when the eel has water supplies to spare. Numerous studies have shown that there's viable options for a dam-free diversion. Folks can find links to those studies at pottervalleyproject.org. And there's also lots of opportunities for irrigators in Potter Valley to improve water use efficiency. At this point, it's really up to Russian River water users to decide how much they want to continue the diversion and to come together to fund and implement a plan. Water users in the Russian River have benefited for 100 years from this diversion, while the salmon and the residents of the eel and our fishing community have paid the price. So now it's really only fair that those who are benefiting from the diversion take their turn at paying for it.
Great, thanks for that, Alicia. I appreciate you just jumping in there and tackling a question. So let's shift gears and we'll start taking some of your questions in the Q&A, and I'll run them down here by order. Brian, Mary Callahan asks about the, and I think most of us have seen it, the last minute license application that came in late next week. And she's interested in how that affects sort of our effort.
Yeah, thank you. We saw that and we're reviewing it, but we don't think it affects anything at all. It's more than 2 years late. And if you recall, I know back to 2019, when PG&E said that they weren't going to pursue a license, it was March 1st, I believe. And Charlie, we can maybe put this letter up into the press kit, or I can if I can upload. But it was March 1st, 2019. FERC issued a notice soliciting applications and what they called the notice of intent, and set that at 120 days from March of 2019 to get the process started. And the only one that did that was the group that we saw, the planning agreement parties, the two basin solution folks. And FERC's normal regs, which are also cited in this letter, say that a license application has to be filed 2 years before expiration of the final expiration of the old license, because there's quite a lot that people have to do beyond submitting, some forms to prepare a license. There's consultation requirements and a thing called a pre-application document, and studies that have to be conducted. And those were among the things that the two basin solution folks, ran out of money to do. And so I think, FERC will, I don't know what the process is. We're looking into that, but acknowledge that was late, and probably, the same time that they direct PG&E to file a decommissioning plan.
It really seems
if there are follow-up questions on that, otherwise I can also turn to the one about schedule.
Are you talking about Mary's second question there? Yeah, if you'd like to take that, go ahead.
I'll take that. And if people have more on this, put it in the chat. Yeah, thank you. So this doesn't have to take a long time, and I'll actually ask Reggie to say a little bit about the work that's been done on engineering and such. But a couple of examples for how the decommissioning process goes. The one that I have the longest experience with being Klamath, where we're looking to secure the final permits and begin dam removal later this year. That process was complicated in ways that Potter Valley isn't, but it went fairly quickly. Even with that, the settlement was amended in 2016, and we first filed the license surrender application in 2017, and then spent about 2.5 years going back and forth with FERC about transferring the facilities to a new corporation called the Klamath River Renewal Corporation, which is not likely to be relevant here. And then completed the actual engineering and all of the permits starting in the middle part of that time, around 2018, 2019. And the NEPA document was circulated a few weeks ago. Final comments are coming in, and the license surrender order and decommissioning order are expected later this year. And so if you add all that up and subtract the time that is different, because we were transferring the facilities at maybe 3.5, 4 years, starting now through the time of beginning dam removal. And I think a motivated applicant, and PG&E might be motivated to get this liability off their books, could go faster than that.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. And I'll just add, one thing I'll add to it on the construction piece is that, we have a really detailed description. One of the benefits we've done over the last 2 years, even though the two basin solution partners bid was ultimately, unsuccessful, there was an enormous amount of information we gathered, about $2.5 million worth of studies that shows really clearly 4 options for Cape Horn Dam, which includes all of which include a diversion, but a run-of-river access, as well as the removal of Scott Dam in a number of in a couple different phases. And so we're really confident that the construction piece would take a couple years. But as Brian mentioned, it's about getting that actual plan in place. And so we feel really confident that the studies we've done, which is funded by Russian River Partners, Caltrout, around Valley Indian tribes in Humboldt County, we have a pretty clear path towards a solution that we're all pretty comfortable with. What it needs now is for PG&E to step up the plate, utilize the tools that we've given them directly, as well as put in the public record, and apply for the only solution we think is feasible, which is the removal of both dams. And so we're really confident in that pathway, and our parties will do everything we can to get that across the finish line with PG&E.
Great, thanks for that. And I think that's we scheduled half an hour here and we've just got a couple minutes left. So I think that's a great place to end. So I wanted to say a big thanks to all of our panelists for joining us today. I'm going to once again put in the chat the link to our press kit. Folks, feel free to grab anything you need out of there. And then, of course, you all have my email from the media advisory. Feel free to reach out if you need contacts for any of the speakers here today. We're happy to put you in touch for follow-ups. And with that, have a good rest of your Monday afternoon.
If anybody thinks of other questions that weren't addressed here, just let us know and we'll work with you and make sure everything is covered.
Right. We'll also send out a recording for this for you all. So you'll have those as well.
All right. Thanks all.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.